Rain whispered against the stained windows of the New York County Surrogate's court. Outside, wind carried the smell of autumn and scandal, and inside the air was thick with whispers and body heat. The courtroom, worn but majestic, seemed to hold its breath. The Trump family name had echoed through this chamber before, but never like this. The door creaked open, every camera swiveled. He walked in, tall, composed, maybe late 40s, wearing a charcoal wool overcoat and shoes polished to an executive shine. His face was unreadable, carved in quiet resolve. Under his arm, a thick manila folder, sealed with federal evidence tape and bearing the stamp of a private forensic lab. Jasmine Crockett, seated near the front under special congressional appointment, leaned back slightly. Her gaze narrowed, arms crossed. This wasn't theater for her. It was a test of truth, of integrity, of power. She didn't blink. The man walked forward and spoke with a slow, clear tone that hushed the gallery. Your Honor, my name is Michael Dow. I am here to assert a legal claim over the estate of Fred C. Trump Sr. and, by extension, assets improperly retained by the Trump Family Foundation. A beat, gasps erupted from behind the velvet ropes. Reporters scrambled for their phones. A lawyer for the Trump estate, red-faced and puffing, jumped to his feet. This is a fraud, he barked. An obvious media stunt. There are no unknown heirs. Michael turned calmly, opened the folder, and placed it flat on the clerk's desk. It contained a notarized DNA test, a 1984 photo of Fred Trump Sr. with a young black woman, and an affidavit signed by a retired caretaker from the Trump estate in Queens. Crockett rose slowly. Your Honor, she began, her voice slicing through the noise. Under congressional authority, I request an immediate review of the documents and a recess to determine preliminary authenticity. If these materials are genuine, this court isn't looking at a minor family dispute. We are staring down the barrel of a $500 million inheritance scheme built on omission, secrecy, and possibly fraud. Donald Trump Jr., seated 2 rows behind his father's legal team, turned pale. Eric leaned in to whisper something frantic, while a producer from Newsmax was already texting someone named Steve W. Crockett walked toward the bench, slowly, deliberately. The American people deserve transparency, especially when tax-exempt family foundations are used to obscure $500 million in movement. This isn't just an inheritance, it's a cover-up with national implications. The judge, an older woman with no tolerance for spectacle, took off her glasses. Miss Crockett, she said coolly, you're saying the Trump family knowingly withheld the existence of an heir? I'm saying, Jasmine replied without flinching, this may be the first time he's walked into this courtroom. But it's not the first time someone in that family wrote his name on a check. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Michael Dow didn't flinch. He simply nodded once, as if the fight was only just beginning. Outside, thunder cracked over Manhattan. Inside, the storm had already started. The courtroom was still buzzing when Jasmine Crockett stood. She didn't slam a folder. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The weight of her words did the heavy lifting. Your Honor, she said, I've remained quiet for over 2 years, watching sealed ledgers, shell companies, and silent money trails shuffle beneath the Trump Foundation. But today I will no longer play along. Reporters leaned forward in unison. Phones buzzed. Across the room, Trump's legal team stiffened. Crockett stepped forward and laid 3 documents on the evidence table. Redacted bank ledgers traced to a Delaware trust, Trump Holdings II, a vehicle known in financial circles, but never formally disclosed in the estate proceedings. These ledgers, she said, show transfers totaling $497 million. Not declared, not taxed, and not traced to any known beneficiary until today. She let that sit, then gently she turned a page. Here's the part that makes this personal. In 2019, a payment of $6.4 million was made from that trust to an anonymous entity labeled MD Holdings. Michael Dow. Coincidence? Gasps filled the room again. A CNN reporter tweeted the line in real time. Donald Trump Jr. crossed his arms, visibly fuming. One of his lawyers leaned in, whispering furiously. Jasmine didn't look their way. Her gaze was locked on the judge, I'm not just accusing the Trump family of misfiling. I'm suggesting the Trump estate concealed the existence of an heir and used its own foundation to funnel assets off record. The judge tapped her pen once against the desk. Hard. Miss Crockett? She asked sharply. Are you asserting criminal intent? I'm asserting a pattern, Jasmine replied. And if the court allows, I'll submit a secondary affidavit, one signed by a former Deutsche Bank compliance officer who flagged these same transactions in 2020. Michael Dahl sat still, face calm, fingers folded. This, Crockett continued, goes beyond inheritance law. This is about accountability. The American people were told the Trump family trust was straightforward, clean, patriotic, but today, I submit, it's a machine built to hide legacy wealth from scrutiny, from justice, and from blood. For a moment, the courtroom was silent. Then, the judge sighed. Motion to recess and review the submitted ledgers is granted. Crockett exhaled, barely. Just enough to steady the fire still glowing behind her eyes. As she returned to her seat, reporters swarmed outside to file the story. Trump family trust under fire, Crockett calls out. $500M ledger fraud. It trended within minutes, and yet inside the courtroom, one question still burned beneath the legal arguments and scandalous documents. If Michael Dahl was telling the truth, who else in the Trump orbit knew? And how far were they willing to go to keep it buried? The courtroom lights seemed dimmer now, as if shadows were creeping in through the walls themselves. Jasmine Crockett stood with a thin file in her hands. Not thick. Not dramatic, but dangerous, Mr. Rothman, she said. Looking straight at the former Trump legal aide on the witness stand, I'm going to ask you again, was there a second will? The man shifted uncomfortably. Harold Rothman had served as a legal assistant for Trump's estate affairs in the final years of Donald Trump Sr.'s life. He wasn't a flashy player, but he'd seen everything. I can't say definitively, he replied, voice faltering. There were drafts, notes, nothing formally filed. Jasmine raised an eyebrow. Would it refresh your memory? She said coldly. If I showed you an internal memo dated April 8, 1999, in which you acknowledge the existence of version 2 FCT addendum, signed in Palm Beach and logged by Mar-a-Lago security? She placed a photocopy on the evidence projector. The courtroom screen flickered to life. The memo bore Rothman's own signature, as well as a red stamped date, the same month Fred C. Trump Sr. passed away. Rothman turned pale. I don't recall this version being finalized. Crockett stepped closer, not blinking, because it vanished. She flipped the page. Another document. This, Your Honor, is a facilities access log from Mar-a-Lago's lower vault, a room that houses sensitive documents and valuables. The last person to access the vault within 24 hours of Fred Trump Sr.'s passing, a man named Jared Burnham, then a junior staffer to Eric Trump. Donald Jr. cursed under his breath. Whispers swept across the courtroom. Crockett didn't raise her voice. That vault has never been audited. The contents of version 2, a will that allegedly divided assets more evenly and referenced an unnamed heir, have never been recovered, Mr. Rothman. Are you under oath willing to state this document never existed? Rothman looked toward the Trump legal table. No one met his eyes. No, ma'am, he said softly. I can't say that. The gallery stirred. Reporters posted updates in real time. Breaking, Trump Sr., second will mystery deepens. Crockett implies evidence tampering hashtag, whereas the will began trending within minutes. Outside the courthouse, protesters had already started gathering. Some held signs, others live-streamed from phones. One banner read, "Show us the vault." Inside, Jasmine turned to the judge. I formally request a court-ordered preservation of the Mar-a-Lago vault records and the appointment of a federal estate auditor. The judge, stone-faced, took a moment, then nodded once. Motion under review. A slow thunder rumbled outside the windows. The storm was building. And the ghost of a vanished will had just come back to haunt them all. Michael Dahl stood in the witness box, calm as ever, hands clasped in front of him like a man who had spent his life preparing for this single moment. The courtroom, tense, expectant, waited for the next detonation. I was born in 1977. He began in a private hospital just outside Queens. My mother, Lorraine Dow, worked as a personal aide at a Trump-owned apartment complex. She died in 2005, but before she passed, she told me that Fred C. Trump Sr. was my father. He paused. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Michael continued, his voice steady. For years I had no proof, just memories. But 6 months ago, I found a letter, hidden in my mother's effects, signed by Fred Trump Sr., acknowledging responsibility. Alongside that letter, a DNA test, and this. He lifted a black leather folder and carefully handed it to the bailiff. Inside, a notarized affidavit from Lorraine Dow, dated 1999, a 2002 hospital record listing Fred Trump Sr. as next of kin. DNA report from a private lab, matching Michael Dow's DNA with Fred Trump Sr.'s at a 99.7% probability. The room exploded. One of the Trump attorneys stood up, shouting, "This is manufactured, a fake, a PR stunt to bleed the estate." Jasmine Crockett didn't blink. She calmly rose from her seat. "Your Honor, I request an immediate injunction on any further disbursement of estate funds and assets, pending a full forensic review of the Trump Foundation's historical financials and a court-authorized validation of Mr. Dow's DNA submission." Judge Whitlow lifted her gavel but paused, staring hard at the documents. "Is the DNA report certified?" "Yes, Your Honor," Crockett said, handing over the lab's certificate of accreditation. "And I've already subpoenaed the original sample chain of custody, which was tracked independently." Outside the courthouse, things had moved fast. Hashtag Trump brother hit the top of X, formerly Twitter, within 30 minutes. Then hashtag inheritance heist. Then Michael Dow was trending above Donald Trump himself. Pundits on cable news scrambled. Fox News called it a coordinated smear job. MSNBC led with "the hidden Trump, illegitimate heir, or suppressed truth." TikTok flooded with clips comparing Michael's facial features to Fred Trump Sr.'s old black and white photos. The resemblance? Uncanny. Inside, Jasmine turned to the judge one more time. "This isn't about politics. This is about legacy and the cost of burying inconvenient truths. We owe the public and this man a full reckoning." Judge Whitlow pursed her lips and finally spoke. "Injunction granted. All estate transactions are hereby frozen pending review. This court will reconvene in 72 hours to examine chain of custody and DNA authentication." Michael Dow didn't smile, he didn't cry, he simply nodded, a quiet acknowledgement of a truth that had lived in the shadows for far too long. The courtroom was still reeling from the DNA revelation when Jasmine Crockett calmly unfolded another set of documents on the evidence table. This time, in a red folder marked "Confidential Classified Release per Court Order." She didn't speak at first. She let the silence build. Let the cameras zoom in. Let Donald Trump, seated stone-faced in the gallery, stew in the storm about to hit him. Then she lifted a single sheet and held it up. "This," she said, voice low and measured, "is a 2018 estate directive." It was signed not by Donald Trump, not by the board of the Trump Foundation, but by Melania Trump herself, authorizing a reallocation of estate assets into a private offshore structure labeled Marula Holdings. A single gasp escaped from the back of the courtroom. Then came the rustling of papers. Then noise. Crockett turned to face the gallery directly. "The Marula Holdings account is registered in the Cayman Islands and received transfers totaling $212 million, funds earmarked originally for the Trump Family Philanthropic Fund under Fred Sr.'s 1984 charter." The screen behind her lit up. An email, dated August 11, 2018, from melania.trump@icloud.com to alan.reynolds@ktrustco.ky. Subject: transfer. Completion, confirm final movement of funds. Ensure it is labeled as charitable investment rollover for optics. DT is not to be CCD. A wave of whispers rippled through the courtroom. Donald Trump Jr. shot up from his seat, his mouth halfway open, but his father, sitting at the edge of the bench with clenched fists, gave a sharp shake of his head. Sit down, he obeyed. The camera caught Donald Trump's face. Not angry, not confused. Something worse, controlled rage. Your Honor, Jasmine said. I submit this communication chain as Exhibit 14. I also submit sworn statements from 2 former K-Trust employees who confirm this account was created exclusively to reclassify inherited assets without oversight. The judge squinted at the screen. And where is Mrs. Trump today? She asked. Crockett smiled thinly. Her office declined attendance, citing irrelevance to the current dispute. Reporters were already texting. News tickers rolled. Millennium implicated in secret fund transfer. Crockett links. First Lady to hidden $212 million ACOUNT on social media. Hashtag Millennium Money and hashtag not irrelevant shot to the top of trending charts. Clips of Jasmine reading the email echoed across TikTok and YouTube, each one looped with captions like, "She's caught." "And she's not even here." Crockett paused, looking around the room. Then back to the judge. "Absence is not innocence." Mrs. Trump's signature didn't vanish. It redirected the course of a legacy and silenced the rightful heir. The judge said nothing. She just picked up the email printout and read it again, slower this time, and Donald Trump, for the first time that day, looked away. The witness chair creaked under Donald Trump Jr.'s shifting weight. He leaned forward slightly, trying to project calm, but the sweat forming near his collar. The slight tremor in his hand as he adjusted the microphone betrayed him. He wasn't in a rally, he was under oath. And Jasmine Crockett was standing just feet away, flipping slowly through her binder like a surgeon choosing the right blade. "Mr. Trump," she began, voice even, "you testified under penalty of perjury that you first learned of Michael Dow's claim 2 weeks ago, correct?" Donald Jr. nodded, flashing the courtroom a faint, tight-lipped smirk. "That's right. Then perhaps you can explain this." She turned and pointed to the screen behind her. It lit up with a screenshot of a text message thread, dated nearly 6 months ago. "Don Jr., did you hear? Harlem guy again? DNA threats?" "Eric, he's bluffing, Don Jr. We can't let this guy get a dime." Gasps filled the courtroom. The judge leaned forward. Donald Jr. stiffened, blinking. I don't recall sending that text." Crockett stepped closer. "That's convenient. Fortunately, AT&T does. The subpoenaed records were time-stamped and verified this morning." The smirk vanished. "It was just talk," he muttered. "I didn't mean you didn't mean to admit you knew Michael Dow existed months before this hearing?" She snapped. "Or you didn't mean to say you and your brother actively discussed silencing his claim?" He looked toward the defense table, but his father wasn't even looking at him. Donald Sr. stared ahead, hands folded, silent. "I thought it was a scam," Don Jr. said finally. "We've had people try to claim inheritance before. This wasn't real. But you never alerted the court, never informed your own lawyers, never told the estate's trustee. Instead, you sent hush money through an intermediary named Miles Rucker, didn't you?" More murmurs. Crockett pulled out a bank record, stamped and sealed. March 3rd, Rucker sends $75,000 to a shell company tied to Dow's last known employer. 2 weeks later, Michael Dow leaves the company with no explanation. Coincidence? Don Jr. swallowed. I didn't authorize that payment. Yet Rucker is your personal aide, your father's fixer? And he made that payment the same day you visited the Manhattan estate office with Eric Trump. I have security footage, Mr. Trump. Would you like to see it? The courtroom was dead silent. Outside, the noise was louder than ever. Through the windows, chants could be heard echoing down the block. Audit the will. Audit the will. Trump lies, Crockett fights. Cable news played the testimony live. Chirons read, Jr. exposed. Texts contradict testimony. Crockett unleashes evidence barrage. Crockett let the moment breathe. She looked at the judge, then back at the jury box, even though no jury had been seated, just to let the symbolism sink in. There's a difference, Mr. Trump, between being born into power and being held accountable for it. Today you learn what the second one feels like. Donald Jr. slumped slightly in the chair. No. One came to his defense. Even his father's fists were now curled tight on the table, not in protection, But in quiet rage, the walls of the Trump legacy were starting to tremble. And Jasmine Crockett was the one swinging the hammer. Ivanka Trump sat poised in the gallery, flawless, composed, expressionless. She wore a muted gray blazer, minimal makeup, and a glinting diamond brooch. Her posture was perfect, hands folded tightly in her lap. From a distance, she looked untouchable. But Jasmine Crockett had been watching her closely. And silence, in this courtroom, wasn't innocence. It was strategy. Your Honor, Crockett began, voice slow and slicing. Thus far, we've heard from heirs, witnesses, and operatives. But one name has hovered above the fray, untouched, until now. The room froze. Ivanka looked up. Crockett stepped toward the evidence table and placed a single-page document face down. Her eyes never left Ivanka's. This is a signed directive dated July 2019. It states that Ms. Ivanka Trump voluntarily forfeited her legal claim to the Trump estate inheritance in exchange for partial control of an offshore holding company, registered in Belize, named Rosemont Property Trust. Gasps cracked across the room like thunder. Crockett flipped the page, Ivanka's signature, pristine and unmistakable, sat beside the phrase, "I waive claim in perpetuity in return for Class A foreign shares." For years, Crockett said, voice rising, we were told Ivanka Trump chose to step away from the foundation out of moral clarity. She gave interviews about building her own legacy, but this document says something else. It says she took her share, quietly, and disappeared it. Cameras snapped wildly. Reporters typed furiously. Donald Trump stared straight ahead, unmoving. But the flicker of betrayal crossed his face for the first time. Behind Crockett, a monitor lit up, a flashback montage. Ivanka in a Trump Tower boardroom, arguing with her father over foundation optics. Ivanka exiting a closed-door meeting in Zurich. Ivanka at a Mar-a-Lago charity gala, standing next to a hedge fund donor flagged for laundering violations. Context reframed. Every still now looked like evidence. Why didn't she speak up when the second will vanished? Crockett asked, rhetorical. Why didn't she challenge the DNA evidence? Or her father's sealed vault? Because she'd already secured her peace, quietly, safely, offshore. Ivanka remained silent. Her eyes stayed forward. No tears. No words, just a rigid jawline, as if holding back more than just emotion. Outside the courtroom, protest signs rose higher. One read, Ivanka sold the silence. Another, what else did she sign? On screen, social media erupted. Hashtag IVNKA new hashtag Rosemont revealed inside. Crockett turned toward the judge once more. I submit this as Exhibit 19 and recommend that Ms. Trump be called for direct questioning. The judge nodded slowly. Ivanka finally blinked. Her lips parted, but no words came, and in that moment, for all her elegance and polish, Ivanka Trump looked less like the daughter of a dynasty, and more like a co-conspirator in its slow, public collapse. A red light blinked above the courtroom cameras. Live for the first time in the case. Full broadcast access had been granted. Every network tuned in. Every word, every pause, every glare, now visible to millions across the country. The Trump children sat in one row, but they were miles apart. Eric Trump, visibly agitated, leaned forward and hissed across the aisle toward the judge's bench. Your Honor, this is a mockery. Ms. Crockett is grandstanding, using congressional power to wage a vendetta. I formally request she be held in contempt. His voice cracked through the mic. Before the judge could respond, a quieter voice broke through. Tiffany? Jasmine asked calmly. Do you have something to say? The room fell still. Tiffany Trump rose slowly, almost uncertainly, clutching a folder that wasn't previously submitted. I received this, she said, her voice soft but clear. 2 years ago. From my grandfather's former accountant. He told me there were documents about Michael and that they were suppressed by the foundation's legal team. She glanced toward Donald Jr., who stared at her like she'd grown horns. I didn't know if it was real, but after everything I've seen, I believe him. Michael Dowell looked down, quietly stunned. Eric turned red. Are you serious? You believe this guy over your own family? Tiffany didn't answer. She handed the folder to Crockett without a word. Social media lost its mind. Tiffany flips #the air and the half-sister #Trump split live on cable news. Pundits salivated. A full-blown Trump family schism. The dynasty is fracturing in front of us. Crockett is peeling them apart like an orange. Inside the courtroom, Jasmine didn't even flinch, while chaos broke loose between the siblings. While whispers ricocheted off the walls, she calmly opened the folder, glanced inside, and gave the faintest nod. "Your Honor," she said, "this corroborates prior testimony. I request it be sealed for forensic review." The judge agreed, and while the world watched a family eat itself alive on live TV, Jasmine Crockett remained still, steady in the eye of a storm that had finally broken loose. The courtroom felt like a charged wire, one wrong breath, and it would snap. Jasmine Crockett stood from her seat with a single sheet of paper in hand. No box, no binder, just one page. But its weight was unmistakable. She walked toward the bench with the stillness of a veteran who had held back her final bullet until the silence could no longer stand it. "Your Honor," she said, voice calm, "with the court's permission, I'd like to enter into evidence a sworn deposition." Dated February 17, 2015. Trump's legal team sat up straight. Donald Jr. mouthed something to his attorney, and Ivanka blinked rapidly as if hearing a fire alarm no one else could detect. "It's from Fred Trump Jr." Jasmine continued, taken under seal regarding private disbursements from the Trump Foundation between 2014 and 2015. Judge Silverman adjusted his glasses. "Proceed." She approached the witness monitor, pressed a button, and on-screen appeared the grainy image of Fred Trump Jr. from 10 years ago. Thinner, quieter, but recognizable. He spoke slowly, voice slightly slurred, eyes heavy with something like regret. "There was a settlement, quiet, low six figures. To a boy in Harlem. I don't know if he was family. Donald said we needed to handle it before the media found out. Something about an intern and a mistake. Michael ... I think that was the name." The courtroom gasped, not loud, but enough to puncture the still air. Eric stood up. "This is a joke." "My uncle was. He had dementia. That deposition's worthless." But Jasmine didn't look at Eric. She looked at Michael Dowell, whose jaw clenched as if his childhood had just been replayed on national television. The judge banged the gavel once. "Enough. This court will recess for 30 minutes. Cameras flashed. Reporters darted for the exits. And as the judge rose, Jasmine Crockett turned, not to the Trump children, not to her staff, but to the courtroom camera, still live. She looked directly into it. Into every home, every phone, every live stream across America. Her voice cut through the feed like a scalpel. "We're done pretending this family plays by the rules." Then she stepped back. Behind her, the Trump siblings whispered. In panic, their lawyers flipped through pages as if searching for a spell that might make this all disappear. But there was no spell. No counter-narrative. The page had turned, and in that moment, short, still, devastating, the quiet history of one forgotten boy had collided with the blinding legacy of a family that had always played by different rules. Now, those rules were broken, and Jasmine Crockett had made damn sure America saw it happen. Judge Silverman returned to the bench with a face carved from stone. His eyes scanned the courtroom, but his gaze landed squarely on the Trump siblings, then drifted to Michael Dowell, whose quiet dignity now held the moral weight of the entire proceeding. He adjusted the microphone. "Given the new deposition and corroborative inconsistencies in the inheritance records, the court finds grounds for a formal investigation into the estate's distribution. Effective immediately, the $500 million trust is frozen pending review by a federal probate auditor." Gasps echoed, Ivanka's face drained to porcelain. Eric closed his eyes like someone who just watched the family crown shatter on live television. Don Jr. simply stared at his phone, fingers frozen mid-text. Trump himself wasn't in the room. But his absence now screamed louder than any defense. The gavel dropped. "Court is adjourned." Cameras exploded into frenzy. Reporters spilled into the steps of the courthouse like floodwaters. Jasmine Crockett emerged through the double doors. Not as a lawyer, but as a symbol, hair tight, expression sharp, heels clicking like punctuation against the marble. She stopped in front of the microphones. Behind her, Michael stood quietly in the crowd, anonymous again, but no longer invisible. "This isn't just a courtroom drama," Jasmine said, calm but clear. "It's the unraveling of a dynasty built on secrets, loopholes, and forgotten victims. This case was never about just money. It's about what happens when power thinks it's immune to truth." The silence was heavy. The world leaned in, and I promise you, she added, this is only the beginning. Inside Trump Tower, aides were already crafting statements. A war room was being assembled to spin the ruling into an attack, a hoax, a witch hunt. The phrase deep state probate manipulation was already trending on fringe sites, but something had cracked, and not just legally. In diners and living rooms across the country, people argued, cheered, raged, but no one looked away. For the first time in decades, the Trump legacy wasn't just under fire. It was under oath. And in that unfolding storm, Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She lit the match and left the dynasty to reckon with the flames.